You are listening to E-Radio Show
by Missed Apex. We are electric.
Hello everyone and welcome to today's show. I'm your host, Matt Trumpets, and today's episode is titled Past Your Peak A. And joining us today with all of the latest information is none other than Chris, no longer _ Stevens. How are you doing today, Chris?
I'm doing great, Matt, because I'm being able to do my job as a journalist. We've got some news to talk about this week.
I know, but before we get to that, I need to remind everybody at home, we are an independent podcast hosted by MissedApexPodcast.com, bringing you race reviews, news from the paddock, and tech analysis. We live stream our race reviews, so be sure to subscribe to E-Radio Show on YouTube so you get a notification when we go live, so you can join our live chat room as well. Well, shall we get right to it?
Big Dirty News.
So I did kind of give it away with that title, and I must give you credit. This was Chris's title this week. Very nice job. Directly in the spirit of our show here. But I sort of gave it away. Tell us, what on earth has happened?
Nelson Piquet is out of Jaguar to be replaced by Alex Lynn. This is a huge news story. It really is. Because, I mean, when was the last time we heard of not just a big name driver, but a champion parting ways with a team mid-season? It just had to happen immediately. And apparently, it happening by Sanya was a delay. They wanted to have this happen in Mexico City. Alex Lynn was there, ready to take part in the test, but he couldn't because of prior Aston Martin World Endurance Championship commitments. So they had to delay it for a little bit and do a couple more races. And the vibe that I'm getting from the people who saw Nelson and spoke to Nelson during those two races was that he just did not want to be there. And I think that there are elements of disappointment on both sides, you know, from Jaguar and from Nelson. We know that Nelson left an underperforming Neo team to join a big name manufacturer in the hope that they would bring him back to the front of the grid. And it just hasn't happened, has it? But equally, Nelson has been very much the second driver in that team to Mitch Evans. Now, we've talked about this on the show last week. Well, not last week, whenever the last race was, but we were just saying, how much longer is Nelson going to be around in that team? Turns out, not very long at all.
No, and it's fascinating. And the way you phrase that makes me wonder, is this a mutual thing? Was Jaguar just saying, we love you, but you have not brought to the table what we expected? Or was it Nelson saying, guys, you need to find someone. I'm out of here because you've not given me what you promised. Do we know?
I feel like it's mutual, but more Jaguar pulling the plug than Nelson.
So any ideas where he's off to now? Any thoughts?
I mean, he could still come back next season. There's nothing to stop him doing that. There are still seats available. I don't think his stock is very high, though, at the moment. That's the only issue. He may be the inaugural champion of the series, but he's really, really underperformed since then. Yeah, he's not had great cars, but even so, he's not been able to match Mitch in the Jaguar, and even was at times coming second to Ollie Turvey when he was in his rookie season at Neo. So you've really got to look at how well he's going to be able to perform. He put last season down to not being able to get to grips with the tires, and I could kind of empathize with that because there were a lot of drivers who couldn't. And they didn't like him because they had a very narrow operating window and they were just causing havoc for a lot of guys and a lot of frustration as well, because you would just have everything right and then half a day later it's suddenly awful and you're overheating the tires after a little slide and then you don't get the performance back. But these new tires, he already admitted, he likes them. They got a much better operating window. We know that the Jaguar isn't exactly performing well. It's really top of the midfield. I say midfield because you've got 7 front-running teams, really. But they're behind Venturi. They're about ahead of, Neo and Dragon, but you could argue that they're, on the same pace as HWA. Well, look at it this way. HWA have had cars in Superpole 3 times. Jaguar, once, I think, this season, by a miracle by Mitch as well. So just to put that into perspective.
Yeah, and speaking of perspective, for every door that closes, a mirror falls off the wall or something like that. And we've got Alex Lynn. We get a second bite at that apple. What are you expecting from him?
Be interesting, won't it? Because everyone was so excited for Alex Lynn coming in and doing a full season when he drove for DS Virgin last season, because that the one-off race he did in New York the previous season was so immense. He performed amazingly. Pole position on his debut, nearly fought for the victory. There were reliability issues that prevented him from properly going for the win on those 2 occasions in New York. But that's why we were so pumped for it as well, because not only that, he was at the peak of his WEC game as well. He had just secured an Aston Martin deal as well. If I'm lining up the events properly, things were going really, really well for Alex. And then in Formula E, it just didn't come together the following season at all. There was, again, some reliability that got in the way, but you cannot deny he was just not on the same pace as Sam Bird. So this is going to be really interesting to see what it's like for him a year on from that, or 8 or 9 months, give or take, and up against a similarly competitive teammate in Mitch Evans as well. Still an underperforming car, but I really do hope we get to see that New York Alex Lynn that we saw for a couple of days.
All right, well, I'm going to ask you a question then. The car that he competed in against Sam Bird, if I'm remembering correctly, is the one that was hideously overweight all season long?
The one that did not belong in the title battle?
And
Yes.
yet somehow it was there. Might that have just been part of it? I mean, could this just be happen to have been Bird's wheelhouse? I can drive anything no matter how bad it is. And with a slightly more compliant car, that we'll see the Lynn that we're expecting?
Potentially, yeah. That's the interesting thing I'm looking forward to finding out. Although compliant car is not something I would use to describe the Jaguar this season. But I just want to say something about Nelson real quick, because when this news came out, I was reminded of a conversation I had with him in Marrakesh about how he came to join the series, because his story in Formula E is fascinating, because he this is what he told me. He told me he was originally lined up to be Nico Prost's teammate at Renault Edams in the first season, and that certain drivers didn't want him in the championship. And we know he's had quite an intense rivalry with Lucas di Grassi over the years, especially, brewing back to their days at the Renault F1 team when Lucas was the development driver and Nelson was the very much underperforming race driver at the time. And even exchanging words in the media, not least, from the FE season finale in season 1 when they were both going for the title, but a lot of other times as well when they both ended up in Brazilian stock cars as well. There was, talk of them, oh, he's just following me into it because he likes to annoy me, that kind of thing. And we've seen them kind of clash on track at times this season as well. But the point was that some people didn't want him in the championship and they tried to veto him effectively. And the manufacturer teams were told, don't take Nelson, apparently. And so suddenly he has the rug pulled out from under him. That's how we ended up at Team China Racing, because they weren't, a manufacturer. They weren't tied in really with Formula E. And they were saying, look, we don't care about what, someone in the office tells us what to do. We'll happily take you on. For him to have then gone on to not only fight for the championship, but then go on to win it as well, was a really incredible story. And I think that's why people got behind him at the time, and why it was such an emotional victory for him at the end of that season. And it's staggering how it spiraled so quickly. And it seems like this is an equally eventful end to his Formula E career as well. For now, he may well be back on the grid, but I'm not holding my breath on that one.
Yeah, he may have soured on the sport, and it's tough. It would be tough to walk in the door knowing you had effectively been blackballed, and then just not only to win the championship, but then to have to put up, I'm sure, with all the stuff that goes on behind your back and behind closed doors, where you know you're being talked about. So, well, it'll be interesting to see what he does next, because he's certainly not without talent.
No,
Yeah.
we know he can be good in certain things. I mean, everyone points to him as kind of the ultimate F1 reject, which I so disagree with that terminology, because it goes back to, how Formula E is supposedly filled with Formula One rejects, which is just a really unfair term. Yes, he really, really struggled at Renault in Formula One, but against Fernando Alonso. Do you know who else struggled against Fernando Alonso? Stoffel Van Dorn. And people still rate him. Maybe not as highly as I do, but there's still, I just get this feeling that he has unfulfilled potential, and that he gets a lot more flack than he deserves.
Well, he gets the flack because, of course, he was a participant in Crashgate.
And yeah, I mean,
and that's where I think a lot of this may come from. Although I've always wondered, I mean, I'm curious, how much do you even know about that? Maybe we're going down a side alley here, but I've always felt like he was sold out by people he trusted. That he got bad advice, and I don't know, he just seems he was thrown to the wolves by people who should have had his better interest at heart.
Yeah, he did what he had to do to save his career.
And I don't know, maybe I'm wrong about that. Obviously, no one who was there has ever really entirely opened up fully about it, so it's all speculation. But yeah, he has enough talent aside from that, and he certainly was good in the first season. But as we say, now it's Alex Lynn's turn. Speaking of turns, shall we wander on to talking about the testing? We've seen on social media all sorts of pictures of all sorts of new cars that aren't yet even in the championship. So who was doing what, and what are our impressions thus far?
Yeah, so private testing very much underway for the new season, all going on in the background, of course. So all the manufacturers get 15 days private testing. You get an extra 7 if you are supplying a customer as well. Although, as it stands, we won't have a Venturi customer next season because, of course, the HWA team is turning into Mercedes, which is one of the teams that has been testing its new car, the Silver Arrow EQ01. Got its first laps at a track called Verano in Italy a couple of weeks ago at the hands of Stoffel Van Dorn and Edoardo Mortara, which is an interesting choice, really. Like, we know Van Dorn is in the running for a Mercedes factory drive in Formula E, as is Gary Paffett, you would have thought. Edoardo Mortara is a Mercedes factory driver already. It makes sense to bring him up to the senior team as well. As much as we expect these Venturi links to remain because they both use their ZF as partnership. So there's that to look into it as well. So I wouldn't be surprised to see any 3 of those guys in that car, really. I mean, even Raffaele Marciello has been testing this season during Marrakesh, and I think he also took part in Mexico City as well. I may be making that up, but he was definitely there in Marrakesh as well. So they're definitely going around their drivers and seeing who's good. We've also had DS testing with Vern and Lotterer. As you'd expect, they're both the test and development drivers for DS as well as Techeetah. And I cannot quite remember off the top of my head where they were testing it, but certainly they've broken cover. And of course, a few weeks ago, we had Porsche doing their filming day, which is 50 kilometers, or what they called the rollout of the car. So basically a shakedown and make sure everything works. So very much the preparations for season 6 are well underway.
And that's kind of brilliant. I mean, I, for one, am absolutely looking forward to seeing Porsche and Mercedes on the grid. As far as Paffett goes, I thought he had a conflict. I thought he had a race that weekend. And that was why Mortaro was in for him. I thought I saw that somewhere, but I could be mistaken.
Well, all Mercedes drivers, so, and you can really only have, two people in for a day's running. And of course, there are going to be many more opportunities. They've got another 12 days of testing, I think, because they did on Wednesday, they did their filming, and then they did Thursday, Friday. So actually, they may even have 13 days. They've still got a lot of running still to do, and they can put a lot more drivers in.
Right. And who are we expecting to break cover next with theirs? Their next generation, next season car?
Everyone should be testing around this point in time. Some teams are just choosing to be public about it. You would expect everyone should be testing around this time privately anyway. They've got to, because you've got to just get on the wagon with this as quick as possible, especially considering that the regulation changes are minuscule for next season. In terms of the technical regulations, there's really nothing. The powertrains are exactly the same. So we're going into a 5th consecutive year of the same generation of powertrains. So, we talked about how this season there was sort of convergence on the design, because they've been running, the same for 4 seasons now, ever since the development opened up back in season 2. You go back to season 2 and how different all the designs were, about how some people just stuck with the season 1 car. Because they had to, because their powertrains failed. Some teams that chose to work on the season 1 car and improve its efficiency and maybe knock a couple of gears off it and make it a bit lighter. Some teams that just went way off with it and went down to two gear solutions, and Audi that had the 3-gear solution and were mounting their powertrains in different ways, laterally or longitudinally, and inverters up high, inverters up low, and all sorts of different packaging, and how it has really come together in since then, that they've all converged on a very, very similar design, except for Nissan, who have done the twin motor thing, same as what NIO have done for the last few years. And of course, they themselves have been making headlines recently, details of which I'm hoping to get in Rome as well. So just sit on your hands for a little bit on that one, guys. I'll give you that in a week or so. But what we are expecting next season, because part of the reason we're seeing convergence this season as well is people went for 1 gear because of weight. Because the weight went up this season with the battery, it was just kind of easier to just go down to 1 gear. Just to make sure that you got the weight, because that is kind of the most important thing, and we've seen the effect that being a few kilos overweight can have. And really, let's face it, so for 2 seasons, Renault was the most competitive car because it was one of 2 cars that was actually under the weight limit and had to use ballast. Everyone else was still overweight. So we can see how important it is. Next season, with the next year's development, I'm expecting to see a little bit more divergence, actually, and teams start to take a couple more risks and try something different in the pursuit of efficiency at the cost of a little bit of weight.
Well, that's an interesting thing to say. Do you have a sense of which teams might be looking at a divergent solution from what we're seeing right now?
DS could be one, because when I was talking to Javier Messina Pino, their technical director in Valencia, and I was asking him about the convergence of the designs, and he was the one who told me it's all because of weight. We don't think it is the most efficient solution. So they very much could be one of the teams going around for it. But most teams are going to be holding their cards really, really close to their chests on this one.
Right. So I take it we're going to be listening closely to the audio tracks of whatever footage they eventually release on social media.
We're going to be, yeah, listen out for gear changes, listen out for rattles when they come into the pits as well. That's a telltale sign. I'm sure everyone testing is really going to be, keeping their ears out for everything, because God knows you don't get to look at the back of these cars all that much these days.
No, they have gotten much more secretive than the last time, than the last season, haven't they?
Oh yeah, 100%. Like even yeah, last season when I was trying to just sneak around the garage. Well, not sneak. That's a bad word for it. It makes it sound like some sort of corporate espionage. But I was just wandering around the back of the Audi garage and got in trouble for looking at the back of the car while it had the bodywork off.
But I mean, how could they blame you for that? There it was. You have eyes.
Oh, no, exactly. It was just staring in your face.
What am I supposed to do? Right in front of me. All right. Well, what do you say we take a little turn and go talk about the upcoming race in Rome? So where do we even begin with this? I mean, 6 races, 6 teams, 6 different winners. It just like what? What are you even going to say that makes sense at this point?
6 different pole sitters as well. I will start off safe and say that to kick off the European season, we are returning to one of my absolute favorite venues and circuits of last season. Remember that epic 4-way battle for the lead we had in the closing stages of the race because of the big strategy changes that were going on down there? Let's just talk about the circuit for a little bit. It's got elevation. It's got so many different kinds of corners. It has got so many different environments as well. You know, it sort of starts off at the top of the hill, winds its way down through the parkways, through the modern part of the city before it winds its way back up the hill, through that sort of slower section around the old 1930s, you know, built up real fascist architecture area of the city. There's so many different layers to this circuit, and it's just so good. I love it so much. I mean, those final few corners can maybe change a little bit, and unfortunately the race is exactly the same this season. I think the Gen 2 cars are going to look a little bit silly going around there, but the rest of the circuit is just so darn good. Remember the jump that they had as they go over the crest of the hill? They're going to fly over that this season with an extra 50 kilowatts of power.
All right, you've convinced me. It's good. I like the microclimate analogy though, because if there's moisture in the air, you're going to have a tremendously different grip through the park section than you will through the city section, and that's not going to make it the least bit easy with that kind of torque. Now
there is rain forecast for this weekend. Now we say this a lot, and I'm not going to sit there and say it's going to be a wet race. I really am not going to believe it until I see it. But if it does rain, you know, that water is all going to pool in the same section, like we saw in Riyadh, actually, because remember, that was all going sort of downhill as well. And the water was all sort of congealing around one corner. And it was just that one section that was flooded that made the whole thing impossible to run the event in the morning. So hopefully we don't see a situation like that again. But certainly if it does rain, it will all be heading down the bottom of the hill to one area of the track.
Right. And given that, who do we favor? Who do we favor in that kind of weather? If we have wet, if there is rain, if the surface is slippy, who are we looking at that we might not expect, and who has traditionally done well in those conditions this season?
Well, traditionally is one thing. We've only had a handful of wet, you know, Formula E sessions, but the thing is that it obviously doesn't change all that much when it comes to Formula E. With Formula One, obviously it makes a huge difference because you're going from a slick tire to a treaded tire, so that's already a big change. But also a treaded tire that is of a different profile as well, so it raises the ride height of the car and immediately changes your entire setup. With Formula E running an all-weather tire, it's already on a treaded street tire. Nothing really changes. You know, the thing that will then differentiate the teams is the driver's delicacy with the right foot, but also the setup. And this is what we saw in Hong Kong, for example, the the wet qualifying we saw in there. Remember, we saw the Mahindras really, really struggling to put the power down, the BMWs as well. So there was something a little bit too peaky about their power delivery. Now, the Nissan that I would have expected to go in the same way with their immense power delivery that everyone's been talking about that gives it such great punch off the slow speed corners actually ran rather nicely in the wet. So there's that to consider as well. It's, it's almost as if their motors are working independently and trying to deliver power at different rates.
Wait, was that a clue? Do I need to wake up and pay attention?
It's fine. No, it's nothing that hasn't already kind of been made public. If you kind of want the interesting details on what I'm sort of alluding to there, go to eRacing 365 and look at the latest Nissan stories. Hopefully I'll be able to give you some details myself as well when I get back from Rome on that. But in regards to Rome, my big question is, can we make it 7 from 7? And the record is 6 from 6 in season 1. So this would be a new one.
Well, you've mentioned Nissan, and if it's wet, that perhaps gives them an additional advantage, as it will perhaps take Andretti out and some of our other normal front runners. Who else do you see being in the lead with this on this circuit? Because as you mentioned, it is a long circuit, and so it's going to favor sort of different cars with different characteristics, cars that have efficiency and good setup will be at a premium this weekend.
Yeah, no, exactly. This one is going to be quite strategic, I think, barring a safety car. It's one of the longest laps of the season. Therefore, if you save energy early on, you get a big payoff later on. That's what set up that awesome battle at the end of last season's race. And to just add on to that, this is one of the best circuits for wheel-to-wheel action and overtaking as well. So throw that in together. What you've got to look at for the new contenders, I think, let's say we're going to go 7 from 7 with 7 different. If you want it to be 7 different teams, it's really going to be Nissan Edams. They're the last kind of top team from this season that hasn't won a race yet. And I think you for the rest of this season, I think now we are going to be looking at Nissan, Audi, Techeetah, BMW, Mahindra, and Virgin. They're going to kind of be the 6 teams that are regularly competing for wins and podiums, because that's just kind of the trend we're starting to see now. I know Eduardo Mortara is still really, a championship contender, but there's not a team I see maintaining this sort of pace throughout the season. And we've seen already in, Sanya, they were nowhere. And the reason he's still tied with Lucas Di Grassi in the championships because Di Grassi got wiped out at the end of Sanya. So realistically, we're looking at those 6 teams. And Nissan is the last of those top guys not to win a race this season. So for teams, they're the ones I'm looking at. For drivers, then you have a few more options because you've obviously got both Buemi and Roland. Verline, yet to win a race, which is staggering. Now, Mahindra are awkward at the moment because of they're sort of risking that sort of slump that they had last season between 2 very competitive races. They had a bit of a dip and weren't really in contention for podiums that cost them the kind of early championship fight, right? Because then they went to Rome and they were really, really competitive. But didn't make it to the end of the race. So this will be a good marker for them, I think, to kind of gauge that performance. But after this time last year, they really, really fell off the wagon. So they've really got to pay attention to that. And Verline's already saying, we need to go back to what we knew worked. We've tried something different. It hasn't worked. We need to go back because we know it works. Who else have we got? Alex Sims. BMW can win races. Alex Sims probably should already have a race win under his belt, as should Verline, but he just needs a bit of luck, really. I mean, he's been so unlucky this season. It's unreal. It's like Mark Webber unlucky, like Nick Heidfeld unlucky. It's ridiculous.
Not just invoke Nick Heidfeld and luck in the same sentence. Oh my.
Yeah, and everyone knows what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Daniel Apps is not my favorite of these guys for a win this season, just because Daniel's been struggling with the car compared to Lucas and hasn't shown the same pace he showed last season. And in a really, really competitive field as well, it's going to cost him more. So it's a possibility because Audi can win races. Virgin have proved that. The factory team has proved that. So let's see where we go with them. Robin Frantz and Andre Lotterer as well. Lotterer should already have a win under his belt. Let's be honest. Hong Kong was stolen. And Frantz, to be honest, I'm surprised we haven't seen him on the podium more, given that. Well, actually, no, that would be unfair because you pretty much guarantee that if Sam's on the podium, then Robin's going to be right up there with them. I know, like Santiago was a bit of a blip in that, but those two are just separated by nothing. You know how a few weeks ago I was talking about the BMWs being separated by hundredths every single session? It's the same with the Virgins. So if there's a big gap between, something's really, really wrong, because there is just nothing between them. And they're both fantastically aggressive as well. I love it behind the wheel. It's so great to watch. Now, of course, there's the other potential is that we're going to get our first double winner of the season.
Yeah, well, it's more likely than not, wouldn't you say, that it will happen here? I mean, 7 is a long stretch to go having a brand new winner. There are a couple. I mean, I could see, there's Buemi and Nissan out there. You could see Sims over to Costa. Frames over Bird, I think that's just down to racing luck.
Yeah, definitely. You can see Nissan in there as well, because even though it's not the slowest track in the world, they do go well on really, really slow tracks. This isn't as slow as like Sanya and Hong Kong, for example, but they're strong in qualifying. And they will get good drive off of that hairpin and that slow end to the lap where it's all just constant left, right, which is a place you can make up loads of time as well. You can really recover a bad lap if you get a good run through there. So I'm not going to discount them. Not at all. You can't, because they've just been on an upward trend all season. And the next step for them is to take a win. But that said, I do think it is more likely that we're going to get our first double winner, in which case we had a good run. How many championships can say they had 6 different winners from 6 different teams in the first 6 races? Not many. So contenders for that, Antonio Felix da Costa goes in as the championship leader. Should be quite good here, I think. He may end up taking it conservatively because of this position. We know he was looking for more in Sanya, but he had his nose chopped really by Roland, and remember, he wasn't very happy about it. So I think he does need to get his elbows out a little bit more. But then if he does so, he's going to really risk, losing a lot of points in the championship, which you can ill afford to do. D'Ambrosio, I don't think is as likely as a candidate. We'll see where Mahindra are at, but they haven't looked all that competitive in the last few races, so we need to reevaluate where they're at. Rosenqvist led most of the race last year, so take that into account. Techeetah, they're back on song. So Vern is absolutely a contender. They just need to replicate everything they did in Sanya, maybe, minus the frustrations they had in practice with all the braking issues and Jev feeling like he was being held up, so he gave someone the middle flag. But Vern is a title contender now. It's undeniable. So they need to start getting their noses in there in more races now. 2 people who really need to strike back after difficult races, Sam Bird, Lucas Di Grassi. Now, for Lucas, it wasn't really his fault. He got wiped out in Sanya, and he had a good Hong Kong at least. But he does need to get back in. He's slipping away a little bit, but as is Sam Bird. He's had 2 really, really difficult races that seen him slip from the championship lead down to like 5th. And I know there's not many points in it, but we're starting to see the gaps get bigger in terms of the points. And at this point in the season, this is when you start to see the championship contenders being filtered out. Now, they'll talk on the stream all they want about how, 10, 15 drivers still have a potential at the championship. But we've got to start being realistic here, because when you say things like that, it relies on the top guys not scoring points for the next 6 races. We've got to be realistic. We're looking at 5 guys for this championship now, I think.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. The fact that they're mathematically within reach doesn't mean that it's very likely. And the guys who've already been on the podium and on the top step are the ones that you're going to tend to want to look at.
But that said, 5 guys in contention for the title halfway through the season, realistically, that is still damn impressive. That's like F1 2010 levels of competitive.
Yeah, no, and from different teams too. So yeah,
all different teams. That's the beauty of it.
It's a beautiful thing. So let's talk about Bert a little bit, because Virgin has shown itself to be a fast car, a car that can run at the front. And it just seems like it's been a case of bad luck for him these last 2 races. Is that all there is to it, or is there something bubbling under the surface, you think?
Somewhere in between, because Hong Kong was the glaring issue, wasn't it, really, where, they would have won that race. It was, let's be honest, it's driver error from Sam that lost him the lead of that race to begin with, and put him in the position that he needed to attack Andre so hard that led to their collision in the end. I'm not going to say the collision was driver error. We said everything we need to say on that incident, to be honest. But, there's a knock-on effect. And the fact that they weren't competitive in Sanya was interesting. Audi in general, as an Audi customer as well, didn't look all that competitive in Sanya, it must be said. But Virgin seemed to be struggling more than others. Now, they'll probably put it back down to the whole being in Q1 thing. But we saw other guys in Q1 and still make it through the Super Bowl. So I don't know how much you can hide behind that excuse. Now, it is fair to say that the lab wasn't good and they were lacking a bit of pace. So... And that's then what put him in the position of, starting in the middle of the pack and being taken out on lap 1, which was not his fault at all. So it just starts to pile on, I think. And, he's still going to be out in Q1 in Rome, I think. Although here I really doubt there's going to be a difference all that much in terms of the track conditions, unless it does rain. And he was really quick here last year as well. And, was the eventual winner after Rosenqvist went out. So if there's a time to strike back, it is now.
Yeah, I see it being more of an issue for him because it has been, it was a penalty and it was the crash. It's starting, but they weren't good in qualifying. They weren't good in practice. And I would think as a driver, that's going to weigh on you a lot when you climb into the car next. And I contrast that with perhaps Degrassi, who, noted for his patience, perhaps he is not, was having a spectacular race until he was taken out. And any driver knows immediately that is not my fault and I was doing a great race. So I would think that he at least walks into Rome with a little better feeling. But I have more doubts about the Audi team this year just because we haven't really seen them in the same way that we saw them in season 5. Like, they don't seem to, we see good runs from the midfield. We see them getting close, but we haven't seen that same kind of dominance that they came onto last season. And I just wonder what's missing right now. What is it they're still trying to find to get back the form they had last season?
Oh, they won't. They simply won't. They had such a dominant car last season because of its design. Everyone's running the same design now, effectively. Well, most teams are anyway. Because all the cars are so similar now, it's so hard to try and gain an advantage. That's why we're seeing the scenario of so many different winners in so many races, because they're all so tightly matched. And it comes down to such minute details to make the difference. You could have a stellar race one day and have a horrible one the next, and have it down purely to pace. And it will just to and fro throughout the whole season, because it's just entirely going to depend on what you do pre-race, during your practice, how your qualifying goes, everything, right? We've seen it so many times this season already. Like, don't even counter in reliability and technical issues and getting caught up in traffic and incidents, things like that, right? Driver error as well. Don't even take into account. You're going to see ebbs and flows. So when you throw all the rest of that in there and stir it up in a big mixing pot, you end up with pretty random results. The fact that you have 6 or 7 teams capable of winning races is mental, because someone has to end up 14th. And you say he was having a hella good day. Yeah, he was 2 seconds off the lead, but he was down in 8th place or around about there. He wasn't in contention for the win at that stage. With 2 laps to go, he still had 4 or 5 cars in front of him, right? Now with Bird, I would have been fascinated to see his comeback through the grid in that way. We saw Buemi marching a storm, especially because of the red flag as well. That would have just completely leveled the playing field for him. So there are opportunities you will seize and opportunities you will miss out on. Sometimes because of your own errors, sometimes it will just be out of your hands. But Sam has always been a driver that is capable of putting that behind him and knowing what he's got underneath him, having faith in what the team have put in front of him. Because you will always look at the terrible cars that he had to drive over the last couple of seasons as well. Particularly season 2 and last season are the highlights, I think, for him in terms of the actual package that DS provided the Virgin team with. And yet somehow he and that team made it work. It's things like that. That is why he's still going to have faith in them, knowing that they do have a good powertrain with them in the form of the Audi this season.
All right, fair enough. Who else do we think is championship material? What do they have to do? What about Vern? He's finally managed to claw his way back in. Do we see Techeetah able to maintain this form? Because they haven't. They've been sort of very hot and cold.
Yeah, I mean, there have been issues, although I don't think too many were purely pace related. Maybe Santiago was one of them, but you know, we have to remember so many missed opportunities for them in the first 2 races of the season, and the sheer amount of bad luck that Jev had to endure in Mexico, for example. Not least having a Piquet flying over the top of his head. Hong Kong, yeah, that was, I think, more down to him underperforming or overdriving maybe, but you would have to say that the reason that they haven't won a race yet has been more down to certain issues than a lack of pace. So if they can keep those issues to a minimum, then they'll absolutely continue to fight for wins this season. But that's the same for everyone, though. You know, we couldn't be having this conversation at all if the 2 BMWs, for example, hadn't come together in Marrakesh and Antonio Felix da Costa had won 2 races on the bounce. We would not be having this conversation at all. You know, think about that. It would have been entirely different. You know, it wouldn't have been 6 winners in 6 races or 6 teams, you know. So the whole face of the championship changes from one certain issue, you know. Or think about how Jev crashed into the side of Sam Bird at the start of that race as well. You know, so many factors, and that's only looking at one race. You know, you could create so many different alternate timelines from this event happening in this race or this event happening in that race, you know.
Well, that's part of what makes it fun. But, you know, here we are, halfway through-ish. Who's going to win?
Oh, man.
Who's going to win? Come on. You have the big picture here. You have the big picture here. Who do you think is going to put it all together at the end of the season? All right, fair enough. Who are your top 3 contenders?
Oh, okay. Yeah. I can definitely. Oh, okay. That makes.
Let's do top three because yeah, I mean it is. We need another couple of races for things to wear out before you could maybe pick a favorite to make a run all the way to the end.
Okay. I'm gonna throw DaCosta in there. The BMW is strong. This is Antonio's time to shine. Lord knows he's earned it after the last few seasons he's had. I'm not going to put Mahindra in there. I just don't have the confidence that they're going to be able to consistently pull this off. We're already seeing the mirroring of last season. I think it's more likely we will have Vern in there. And then an Audi driver. But which one, Bird or Degrassi? That is a big question that I will answer with Bird, because the Virgin has shown more pace than the Audi has done during the season, more consistently anyway. And that's about it. But that's a really, really tough choice between Sam or Lucas. Who would I rate higher for the title?
Well, I would actually agree with you, but I don't think you have to rate either driver more highly. I think if you look at the season, Bird and Virgin have been more successful than Audi for whatever reason. And I think that just gives them unless they've just wandered into a blind alley on their setup, that just gives them the advantage going forward. They've been more successful in a wider variety of conditions.
The thing is, like, both teams have had issues and have had bad luck, being wiped out from races, gotten involved in some of their own instances, won 2 incredible races as well between them. But I think the difference has got to be Audi's really difficult start to the season, where Virgin were able to hook it up a little bit better and Audi couldn't. That's really what's made the difference. And the thing you got to remember about Virgin as well is that they can only get better, because they had 3 days of testing and 3 days of public testing that everyone else got. They are 9-10 days short of every other team in terms of private testing on the grid. The fact that they were within victory contention like that is pretty astonishing. So they know how to win races on the back foot, and they're only going to get better.
All right, then. Well, I think that kind of brings us to the end of the show. So where can we find you? What are you up to, Mr. Stevens?
You can follow me on Twitter at Chris on Racing. That is where you're going to be seeing all of my Formula E updates from Rome this weekend. My last Formula E race for some time, I would imagine, obviously with me having a grown-up job now, means I've had to leave the play pit. But I'm looking forward to it. It'll be nice to see everyone for one last time, and it's a good spot to be doing it in as well. But in terms of everything else I'm still doing all sorts of stuff, still writing about Formula E. Of course, you're never going to stop me doing that. Still doing this show as well, and the Missed Apex podcast as well. We were doing the China preview a couple of days ago for the 1000th Grand Prix, so go ahead and check that out. And also I did my second ever live comms job, Simply Race endurance series in Milton Keynes. 13 hours on air I managed, which is really chucking myself into the deep end, but that's something I enjoy doing. And I'm currently working on my new website as well, so I will plug the hell out of that when I eventually get that finished.
Well, get on it. And now, are you going to be at Rye House for the karting?
Oh, how can I forget? The month that never ends for me is April this year, with that and Rome, and the Rye House karting as well. I believe we do still have some spots available. So if you want to come to Rye House for a live show recording, a Missed Apex podcast, and an awesome day of karting on April 20th, get in touch with Spanners, spannersready@gmail.com. I think we're currently doing £79 for that. For that, we're doing 3 heats and a final to go across the day. Honestly, it's going to be such an amazing day. If it's even a tenth as good as what Butmore Park was for us, then it will be sensational. So do get in touch if you're free.
Absolutely. And I sadly won't be there this time around, but I promise I will do everything I can to make it next time, because it really, really, really is a fantastic event. You get to meet everybody, people that you talk with in chat rooms, people that you see on YouTube, that you hear on your podcast, and you get to race. And it's somewhat, even if you're never karted before, which I never had karted before, it's just an amazing amount of fun. You should really, really go do it. And I believe Brad has even put up a track guide to Rye House. So if by all means, go look at that first.
Yeah, absolutely. Go and cheat if you want. It's all fair game. Now, the thing, even at the last event, we had people who'd never karted before, and they loved it. There was such a huge mix of ability in that field, and it just didn't matter because everyone was having a great time, and we're all going for like a beer afterwards as well, and we'll just hang out. So yeah, if you're free, do get in touch.
Absolutely. As for me, I'm at MattPT55 on the Twitters, and you can catch us as well at eRadio Show. And if you're part of our Missed Apex Slack group, be sure to join the Formula E channel. And remember, chicks dig heels, wounds cause scars, and glory is a fungible concept under certain philosophical precepts. This has been eRadio Show.